Hello everyone, welcome to Module 2 of this course, Internet of Things Security. In Module 2, we are going to look at the current existing IoT security measures that are out there, the issues with the IoT security measures, the UK laws that apply to cybercrime, cyber physical crimes, and therefore crimes in the Internet of Things, and then we are going to summarize this module. Now, before we even start talking about Internet of Things security, issues with Internet of Things security, hacking in the IoT, we probably want to take a step back. We probably should take a step back and look at security as a whole. Okay, what historically has been a challenge for security? What historically has been a challenge for the acceptability or the acceptance of cybersecurity in industry or even in our daily lives? I'm sure some of us have heard this statement before, or this analogy that the most secure computer system is the one that is not used by anybody and not networked and not accessible. So it's a machine that's been shut down, locked up in a box, and thrown into the middle of an ocean somewhere or a river somewhere. It's highly secure, but absolutely useless. Serves no function, serves no purpose. So historically, in IT, in industry, in cybersecurity, we have always had to make a trade-off between the functionalities that we want to introduce to our systems, to our websites, to our devices, like Internet of Things, for instance, that will become more prevalent in the coming years. The usability, so the ability for end users to access these systems, use them easily, and the need for security. We've always had to have these trade-offs. So as we make progress towards talking about IoT security in this course, we should remember that some of the issues that we find in the Internet of Things with respect to security stem from this historical background, this historical basis, apart from the fact that some security issues also come from the fact that companies generally, or typically, do not plan for security when they design IT solutions, software or hardware IT solutions. Apart from that, we've also had an issue with functionality and usability being placed above or being prioritized. Some companies are not even aware that security is something that they need to factor into their design, to the planning, design, and development of software or hardware solutions. And on the right of your slide, you will see uh, some of the things that influence decision making when it comes to implementing security. One of them is, well, time to market. Okay, in today's world, in the IT world, things move really quickly. Okay, apps are being developed by the minute. New solutions are being developed every day, new hardware solutions to solve different problems. And companies, okay, have to be on the forefront. They have to remain at the cutting edge, and they have to be at their best. Okay, if they spend time trying to fix every issue that they discover with their devices, their tools, their solutions, they might end up being left behind in the market. So if you have two rival companies, or even 10, with the way things are going, you can have 10 companies working in the same field, coming out with solutions that meet particular needs. For instance, we probably meet maybe health management needs, healthcare needs, personalized healthcare needs. Okay, you provide a solution like an app, for instance, that collects data about end users, uh, displays the information on their phone, and it's information that they can also access, for instance, on a wearable, like a wrist wearable. If you have 10 companies that provide that kind of solution, they want to make the solution as easy to use as possible, as timely as possible. Um, and when you start to talk about the need for security, to secure that product, to put in different functionalities, maybe to even withdraw the product because of some security flaws, you might find that you are going against the very basic requirements, I would say, of the company. The company CEOs, CTOs, in fact, CFOs, chief financial officers, chief technical officers, all the C-level, C-suite staff might say, "You listen, we've set up this company to make money, to provide services. What you are asking us to do is to interrupt our service so that we can fix a little flaw here, adjust the software there, sort out the firmware, the code here and there." Well, that's going to delay our time to market. We have things we need to implement. We have hundreds of or thousands of customers, okay, that are enjoying this product. And you're asking us to, as a security professional, to delay our time to market. For instance, maybe during a first launch, for instance, like an alpha launch of a product, you're asking us to delay our time to market. Well, it's a rat race out there. Our rivals uh, have already announced a launch date for their own products. Well, we have to make sure that we beat that date. Okay, so time to market generally, okay, is something that you need to consider as a security professional. So what I'm trying to get at with this slide is, even if we come across the issues in cybersecurity, okay, issues, for instance, that you think end users should be aware of or companies should be aware of, you must remember that there is always a trade-off. Okay, you'll find that when you work in the cybersecurity field, for instance, in companies that are not main, whose main role, for instance, or main function is not cybersecurity, main industry is not cybersecurity. There can be health care companies, or retail companies, academia, for instance. You have to be prepared to work with these trade-offs and respect and understand people's requirements and feelings on this issue, and support them as best you can, highlighting the need for security and the challenges and the issues that companies will face if they do not take security as seriously as possible. The need for new features is another thing that companies pursue, and that sometimes will lead them to put security second or even last. Okay, companies want to enhance their products, entice customers, more new customers, keep and retain existing ones. They want to add more features to their products. This is during this process, they might decide, what, a trade-off is necessary. Security, locking down certain parts of our software, that's not going to be good for us, because we really need to have these kinds of, flashy images, interesting colors, buttons, all this functionality. We want the software to be able to connect to the cloud, connect to this type of back-end system, use different kinds of microservices and so on. That's also something that causes a trade-off. The cost of a delay is something that I've talked about already, but I'm just going to mention again that security sometimes, in fact, almost always causes delays. Okay, having to go back to the drawing board, re-engineer your software, for instance, test it, find bugs, clean out those bugs. That takes time. Okay, and time, as some people say, is money. Okay, ease of use versus training. But now we are going to look at the Internet of Things. Internet of Things solutions, if companies wish their solutions to be used widely and accepted widely, they'd have to make their solutions easy to use. If you start to implement too many security features, for instance, asking end users to adjust security settings as soon as they log in, you may just find that end users will go for a solution that has an easier setup system. So companies will then have to ask themselves, well, will end users require training to modify, to configure this system in order to meet security requirements, higher security requirements? If they would that discourage them from purchasing our product? It's a trade-off you have to bear in mind. The cost of security as well. Cybersecurity professionals have to be paid. Okay, the tools have to be purchased. Tools for scanning, for instance, detecting bugs, for fixing bugs. Some of them automatically, fixing security bugs. Um, all of these have to be purchased. Okay, there's a whole raft of security tools. We're talking about IDS, IPS tools, for instance, and net firewall tools. implementing these on a large scale, for instance, in organizations, implementing them on small scales, for instance, encryption solutions on perhaps on a smart fridge. So if you say, okay, well, communication between my smart fridge and my retailer, maybe where I go to shop, I want the communication to be through a VPN or through I want it to be encrypted end to end. Well, it's cost of security, cost in time, and cost in money. Okay. Um, well, the limited and low form factor of IoT devices is something else that has to be considered. You want to make sure these devices are as secure as possible. For instance, the devices that can be found in smart homes. However, some of these devices have really low form factors. They're quite small, minimal storage space, minimal processing power. But if you look at things like motion sensors, for instance, minimal processing power. Motion sensors are useful for presence detection, for instance, which is good for security. Also good for healthcare management. So you can use motion sensors to detect motions, the motion of perhaps an elderly person who lives alone in their home. Even though they are enabled by smart homes to live alone independently for longer in their own homes without having to go into care homes or shared accommodation, um, the motion sensors have to be able to detect their motion and then relay this information to, for instance, a monitoring station. Um, Now you may say, well, I want the person to live alone happily in their own home, which is which research has shown is the preferred option of most old elderly people. I beg your pardon. They'd rather stay in their own homes, but that information has to be secured. Now, will you go all out and say, well, let's encrypt the communication then? You know, let's use a VPN. We have 50 motion sensors around this home. Let's keep it as secure as possible by throwing all the security measures we have at it. um, that might not be feasible and it might not be the best option. So low form factor is something you have to be aware of if you're going to go into security in the IoT. Um, Another thing that is common in a lot of companies is, well, this issue of security is irrelevant. It won't happen to us, or it hasn't happened to us yet. It's come on. That is not real security. That is the most dangerous approach to security. Um, Companies get hacked all the time. Hacking is an ongoing activity, especially with the rise of organized cyber criminality. So it will be unwise for any company today to take that stance that, well, it has not happened to us, or it really will not happen to us because we're a small company, nobody cares about us. Well, small companies, especially small app development firms, are the ones that are mainly coming out with the cutting edge solutions that we see today. Of course, they are taken up and bought by larger companies, larger firms, but when they start small, they have to remember that irrespective of how small they are, they can be viable targets. In fact, they are easier targets because, well, hackers know that they don't have the investment to secure their systems. So they're easier targets. They're absolutely viable. In fact, they're the best kinds of targets, out there because they can easily be locked down, for instance, using ransomware and be forced to pay ransoms. Okay? And because these are firms that are owned by maybe these are one person owner firms, they might say, well, I have nothing else to live on. This is all I've put my entire life savings into. I have to pay the ransom. Okay? So any company can be attacked successfully. If it hasn't happened to you yet, doesn't mean you have not been attacked. It just means the attack has not been successful or you have not yet detected it. Okay, so perhaps the hacker is already in your network, or several hackers are in your network already, siphoning information from your network, stealing even perhaps money from your network, okay, or just data, which is actually pricier these days. So this excuse of saying it won't happen to us is not a good one, and no company going forward should take that stance. And then lack of security knowledge, skills, resources. Um, there are companies, of course, that cannot afford to pay, for instance, to have their own CISOs or chief technical officers. Okay, that's understandable, but one of the main issues companies face, and the reason why security appears not to be taken seriously, because they don't know what to do about security. Okay, so if we're going to go forward with this course, as we go forward with our security careers, we have to understand that there are a lot of challenges that companies face, that even individuals face, end users, you talk to people from time to time and they tell you, listen, I have no idea what you're talking about. All these things you're saying, I have to change my password, I have to make password complex, all that, listen, that's too difficult. I have to, what's encryption, So we have to remember it's a challenge for people. We have to respect this and we have to be as supportive as possible. Going into the Internet of Things, when you hear about issues like, oh, Mirai was successful because of weak default usernames and passwords, it's time for you to fill in that gap as a security professional, okay? Start to contact the different companies that are at fault, that are involved, and say, listen, you can be a lot better at this, okay? Offer your support, offer your services, offer your suggestions, and let's see if we can make this a more cyber secure space for all of us. On this slide, I present what I will call an example IoT network. I know in module 1 we looked at some example IoT architectures, but here I've tried to break it down into um, what probably will resemble what you recognize in terms of having an Internet of Things based network. So let's look at it in some detail. If you look at this part of the network, this can actually represent, for example, a smart home network. We have a gateway hub mobile device, like a smartphone, and a thing. You can have more than one thing in a smart home. You can have 20 motion sensors, one smart fridge, a smart car, and so on and so forth. Okay, wearables and things like that. Mobile devices, a simple hub, or you can go without a hub and just have a gateway, which will probably have a firewall, IDS, IPS, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, you have the internet and cloud service providers on the external network and everything else within, okay, on the internal network. This slide is to show you how these things interconnect, okay? The different nodes that are available on typical smart, well, there's no such thing as a typical IoT network, but on an example IoT network, let's take it that way. And of course, to talk about the different functions that these different nodes and different endpoints serve on a network, on an IoT network, like a smart home network. Okay, so you can see clearly that networking, okay, local or external, can be wired or wireless using some of the protocols, remember, that I talked about in module 1, okay? Now, looking at this slide, I want you to think like a cybersecurity professional and think about the vulnerabilities that apply, okay? The different interfaces and these networks, and do they need to exist, and what doesn't have to be on the network, and the different functions that these devices serve, and can the functions be combined? But we're going to take this as our basic starting off point in terms of introducing ourselves to a basic IoT network. So you have a smart thing. Smart things fit into a spectrum, okay? You can have a spectrum ranging, you can have, the spectrum basically ranges from the tiniest to the largest device, okay? A motion sensor, okay, in a smart home. A door sensor, for instance, toilet door sensor, kitchen door sensor, living room door sensor, all the way to a shipping container or a fighter jet or an aeroplane, okay, carrying hundreds of passengers. So, but within a smart home, we are going to look at maybe a fridge, a learning thermostat, and a motion sensor network, a motion sensor. Okay, so we have a thing, a motion sensor, which can be connected to a mobile device and then feed information to the user of the mobile device. This mobile device can be internal to the home or even external somewhere. Okay, feed information and inform maybe uh, a young person that, oh, your grandmother at home has not left her bedroom all day and it is 12 noon. Useful information to have. So this user, the person holding this device, can then trigger an alarm or reach out to a carer. This thing can also speak directly to a carer's mobile device or straight through to a hospital, okay, a healthcare service provider. You can have a smart fridge, for instance, that can be contacted by a service provider, perhaps periodically pinging or searching the fridge to make sure that the user has not run out of certain food items, finding out what the user has and recommending menus based on what the user has, and recommending items that are on sale that the user might choose to purchase. making recommendations as well based on what the user purchases regularly, the user's plans, maybe the user's diary about visitors coming or a birthday coming up or something, any kind of important occasion, and saying, you know what, you might want to purchase a cake, and the cakes are about to go on sale, so can we reserve one for you, things like that. So a fridge now, okay, will be useful in this scenario. They might contact the user, or contact or go in straight to the fridge, okay, and communicate with the fridge. So when the user goes to the fridge, the user might get a message on the interface on the fridge saying, you know, this and this are available. Should we deduct this? Should we charge this to your card? And would you like to have these delivered at a discount or something because you're using an automated system, a smart system? So the smart thing can communicate directly with the mobile device, can communicate straight to the gateway to the service provider. Okay. Now, service provider actually can just be provider of the fridge and not a grocer, for instance, a green grocer. So the service provider might be in touch with a grocer somewhere. Okay, people that the companies that actually sell the foods stock that the user requires. So you see, there's a whole chain of communication going on here. You have to think in security terms as you think about all this. Think about privacy as well, and the different interfaces and the different protocols that are involved by these different providers of the different nodes in this our little smart home here. Okay, you know what the hub is there for, of course, providing interconnectivity, routing, communication. But the hub is something that you might choose to not to have in your home. You can decide, you know what, I'll have a combined hub, router, switch, gateway, firewall, IDS, everything on one device. Up to you. Remember security 101 and single points of failure and all those things that we learned, those days will still apply. So just be careful with your planning. But we are not looking at that right now. You notice I put security, I put asterisk in front of the word security all around. Well, it's not because I want to expand on it below, where I say security involves confidentiality, integrity, availability, non-repudiation, and everything else that security covers. But I also want to leave security pending at this point in the presentation. So this asterisk is actually asterisk and question mark. So what I'm saying is, does security actually apply on smart things today? Does it apply? Is there adequate security on our mobile devices? The devices, for instance, that you're using to watch this video or you're using to make a phone call. Does it apply? Is there enough security on our hubs? Do we have enough security on our gateways? Is there actually a firewall here? So it's a question mark. What kind of security is available in the cloud? Service provider, the food stocks, okay, the vendors, for instance, people who provide the food stuff to us through the service providers or directly to us on our mobile devices, information about food, shopping habits, recommendations, what security is available on all these networks, these interconnections, these interfaces, what kind of security is available, okay, in all these protocols, how secure are they? Okay, as we go on, you will see some information about examples of attacks that have used or that have been enabled because of the presence of one or two of these, especially one of them, these protocols, okay? But now we look at the thing itself in the smart home. Remember, a spectrum of devices. We can have motion sensors, or we can have a car sitting outside a fridge, or a learning thermostat. So a thing should have some of these features, okay? Should be able to sense, okay, sense stimulus, receive stimulus from the environment. Motion sensor receives motion and actuation, so it activates. It does something. It receives the motions, reading. It says, oh, somebody has moved, and it does something. Okay. It sends out maybe information. It says, M001. So motion sensor 001. If you have 20, you have M020, M019. Okay. M001 on, and after a few seconds, you can say M001 off. Okay. There should be networking. It should be able to communicate, right? Okay. Communicate with the mobile device of the user or the carer, or the gateway to the hospital, right? It should be able to send and route that information, store information. Remember, it's a spectrum, so of course, it will be reasonable to recognize that the storage on a motion sensor is not going to be the same as the storage on a smartphone or in a smart car. Okay, so storage will vary, but there is some storage configuration. There's typically storage and configuration. Of course, the end user will configure the smart things on their network. Okay, thinking again, putting your security hat on. How secure is the configuration? How much configuration is required in a motion sensor? Is it just something you just plug, plug somewhere, you stick it on the wall somewhere, stick it on the door, stick it on your ceiling, stick it on, on around the house just to pick up motion? Is that enough?
what kind of configuration do you have in your car, and autonomous vehicles, or even your everyday vehicles, the ones that are not autonomous or self-driving, what kind of security applies, and so on. So user web interface is also something that needs to be considered. How well designed are they, and is security thought of as part of the design? Identification hopefully exists for each of your smart things. Remember, I gave an example of M001, first motion sensor in the house, for example. What is the identification on your car? How does that identification tie to the end user? Should the identification of the car, be should it actually be tied to the end user? Should I be able to sniff the information coming from the car and say, ah, that car belongs to this particular person? Is that the best for security? These are questions we need to think about. And then security, of course, is a pending question under all of these. Now we go to the mobile devices. This is tale almost as old as, well, time, not exactly, but we know about mobile device security. But now we're looking at it in the context of an IoT space, the applications on our IoT devices. Generally are what we use to communicate with our smart things. Okay, the smart things don't just communicate in the ether, or some of them can't communicate directly. Like I said, it can be reached directly, but typically all Internet of Things devices don't just speak to gateways; they speak to mobile apps. Okay, sorry, did I say all? Typically, more and more IoT devices, not all, are speaking to apps on mobile devices. Okay, so how secure is that app? What kind of secure software development was done in the process of developing that app? Apps are designed, every day, okay, and deployed onto our app stores for us to download and use and communicate with our devices. How secure is it? Can the information between the mobile device, wherever it is roaming, can it be sniffed? Is there any kind of encryption? Is there any kind of login required for this user to communicate with this fridge? How many people can communicate with the fridge? Using, for instance, sniffed packets, can they just sniff this communication and then replay the information, or corrupt the information and cause the fridge to place the wrong kind of order, or to reject an order? So the mobile device can also serve as a gateway. Hopefully there's some kind of identification between the two of them. Perhaps they for instance, or just an example, I don't want to talk about security at this point, but for example, you can have a system in place where you say, you know what, this thing and all the things in my house should not be able to communicate externally unless they communicate with a particular gateway, and they mutually identify to each other. Okay, just as we have mutual authentication, we can have basic mutual identification. So are you who you are? Are you who you say you are? Prove that, and then yes, okay, we both share maybe an ID within this range. Have some kind of security lockdown within your home. If this doesn't have to communicate directly with the internet or a service provider, then make sure its communication is kept local. Okay, so I'm just getting out with identification, and then communication. Mobile devices should be able to communicate with smart things and with everything else that is necessary. Storage, of course, we have smartphones that have storage space, gigabytes, they're running to gigabytes now. And security is also crucial. Where a hub, again, can be seen as just a simple device that just passes information around, so on, or it can actually be seen as more. But whatever device it is in your smart home, again, we are only considering smart homes, but these can actually be found in larger networks. Okay, so but we're considering smart home only today. Whatever hub you are dealing with, security is important. Whatever you use your hub for is important. If it's not there, then that's fine. Okay, but if it is there, security must be considered. And that's another thing we need to consider within the IoT. Interconnecting too many things, it just introduces more opportunities for attacks to happen. So limit your network devices to what you actually require on your network. Now we're going to the gateway. This connects the devices within the home network to the outside world, except where, of course, in cases where the devices can communicate directly, like with mobile devices, using cellular telecommunications and other such communications systems and solutions. So on the gateway provides routing. Again, we might have a router there or a switch or anything like that, a power over internet device, power over Ethernet device, and communications as well. Very important on our gateway. We have different kinds of protocols. Remember our protocols, again, routing. And then, of course, security is also something that we need to consider on the gateway. Looking at our cloud solutions, what do they provide? They can serve as our data center. They can say, you know what, we will store all your data for you on the cloud. And then they, of course, can do some processing and pre-processing of our information for us before it gets to the service provider. Okay, so data center for processing, pre-processing, storage, and also some security solutions can be provided in the cloud. And then service providers, these can be, again, example, for example, the company you bought the fridge from, okay, or the company you bought the learning thermostat from, or just a company that that actually sells you food, for example, okay. And these can also be maybe companies that store updates from different service providers and push updates to you. So a service can be anything. Okay, so they might choose to store your data and say, you know what, if you store your data with us, we'll process it, pre-process it, clean it, and go out and search for deals for you and then recommend these deals to you, okay, for your smart fridge and so on and so forth. And then we have, they can also provide processing and different kinds of services. They can serve as a data center. And you also need to critically consider the service level agreements that you have with your cloud providers, service providers, and all other providers, okay? Before you sign any agreements, before you purchase any smart thing, what kinds of services, what level of services are they going to provide? Is security part of the discussion, okay? So this is just an example of what applies in an Internet of Things environment. I don't know if you noticed this, okay? We've been talking about things being contained within a local network, external network, and then mobile devices being able to communicate from anywhere, hospital area networks being able to reach end users directly, for instance, using their own mobile devices, communicating with the end users and saying, you know, you've not stood up today, it's getting late, get up and take your medicines and your meals. Well, observe this, okay? We have many of us anyway have mobile devices, and when we walk around with our mobile devices, many of us scan for access points, looking for free Wi-Fi connectivity and connections, right? So we can use the internet. I put this in the corner here because even with our IoT devices like our smart cars, okay, and several other IoT devices, we have the same situation, okay, applying it. We have smart things scanning Wi-Fi networks as they go along, as they drive along, trying to connect. Not just your phone, which is of course part of the Internet of Things. Other smart things scan constantly. If they've got Wi-Fi on and they're set to scan, they scan around looking for hotspots that they can connect to. Alarm bells should be ringing now for any cybersecurity enthusiast watching this and listening to this. Oh, that is a potential entryway for cyber criminals. Apart from all these interfaces and all the numerous protocols that will be running around on this network. Okay, this is also another potential area through which malicious parties can get into our smart homes. So just I hope this has given you a simple picture of what an IoT network can look like. Okay, you can, like I said, it's all about, remember your network design. Again, it just depends on your history of network, of IT and security, but my own history comes all the way from, you know, basic networking, repairing computers, you know, fixing laptops, computers, then networking, then network design. So remember your network design, not every device is necessary. Not every connection is necessary, okay? Not every connection has to be two-way. So a lot of these things have to be considered. And because you are lucky you are in cybersecurity, you can also look at your networks from a cybersecurity angle, from that perspective, and say, you know what, I'll take this out, I'll take that out. Why does this have to communicate directly? Why should they be able to reach it? What if we make this a one-way connection so they can only receive information and not push anything back? Should there be, for example, password communication? So before this can reach, or if not just password-based communication, should we maybe lock it down using something else before they can contact the thing directly? Should they have to authenticate themselves? Okay, do not assume that these solutions exist. That's why you're taking this course. We need these solutions to be developed, to be designed and developed, but they have to be lightweight and manageable and usable. And if you're not going to make them lightweight, you have to find a way to make them as light as possible before they hit the end node. So I hope this gives you an overall idea of what we're talking about when it comes to the Internet of Things and communications across IoT networks. This can be extrapolated across, you know, buildings of 200 flats with 200 smart homes. You can put this into a smart space like an aeroplane space, okay? It doesn't have to be confined to a local static network. All right, so that's our slide on communicating and communication with a thing, with a smart thing. And going to move on to the next slide. On this slide, I've put together some example IoT layers that exist out there. We have some vendors or some researchers designing their own Internet of Things set of layers, what they think the IoT layer should look like. So one perhaps useful analogy would be the TCP/IP OSI layers. You remember that from those days about basic networking. So different, like I said, different people are coming out with their own examples, their own illustrations, their own suggestions for the layers that should make up the Internet of Things. In fact, one that I have not shown, that is not shown on this slide, is the IEEE P2413 three-tier layer for the Internet of Things, or three-tier architecture, three IoT. In the IEEE P2413 layer system, we have applications, networking and data communications, and sensing layers, so three layers. For the figure 1 on this slide, which is shown, you can see the business layer, application layer, middleware layer, network layer, and perception layer. And each of these layers are subdivided into smaller boxes that contain different functions and different examples of what should be carried out in those layers. What are the proponents of this example or this layer system have decided should fit into each of these layers. In figure 2, you see a similar situation. However, the proponents of these have come up with two different sets of layers. Application layer, network layer, perception, forming their three-tier layer, and then business layer, application layer, processing layer, transport layer, perception layer, forming the 5-tier layer system. And then for figure 3, we can see we have internet and cloud, session communication, router, smart hub, and link layer. Okay. With figure 4, we have application, okay, network, and perception, which is quite similar to what we have in figure 2, except figure 2 then has two different sets of IoT layers. So what we need to get from this slide is that the IoT is still happening, it's still in flux, okay? Perhaps at some point there will be some kind of coming together of minds and of ideas and some kind of agreement where a standard set of layers, or two rather than 6, 5, 6 to 10 or to 100, perhaps just two that can be agreed upon, or just one for standard IoT layers, IoT communication, and then protocols that apply on each layer and functions and so on and so forth. Okay.
In module 1, we looked at the characteristics of things in the Internet of Things. Now on this slide, I'm going to introduce you to a few more features that things in the Internet of Things have. Some of them have all of these features. Some of them are affected by all of these keywords on the slide. Not all of them are, okay? So we're going to look at the first word, autonomy. This just describes the characteristic of a thing to be able to be independent, to be self-deciding, okay? And autonomy is not always full autonomy. You can have semi-autonomous systems and fully autonomous systems. So when you hear people talking about self-driven vehicles or autonomous vehicles, smart carer systems, so smart robots that provide care for the elderly in their homes or in hospitals, what they are describing is an AI-led, an AI-driven system, or a system driven by any other kind of futuristic technology that we will come up with, or technology in the future that we will develop and come up with, that is able to make decisions on its own based on past knowledge, based on information fed into it, and so on. And so as long as the system is not dependent on another thing, another smart thing to make a decision, or a human, so there's no need for human input, human interaction, machine interaction. It's on its own, standalone, and it decides, you know what, based on what I have learned from working with this user, or based on the algorithm that's been fed to me and how the algorithm is supposed to work and what I have sensed from my environment since I've been set up, perhaps a year after I was set up, for example, now, I'm going to make a decision to do this. I'm going to make a decision to take the turn left, to take a right instead of taking a left. Okay, I'm going to make a decision to say, you know what, in order to get my occupant, so this can be a smart car or self-driven vehicle, in order to get my occupants to work on time, okay, I'm going to read data from the for example, GPS system in the car, okay, and then make a decision. Read information from Google Maps, information from the news network, the latest weather reports, and then make a decision, okay. The ability to stand on its own and make those decisions without input, direct input from a user or any other system. It just sits there and decides this is best, okay, this is what works in this scenario, and this is what will yield the best results, okay. The best way to get the user to work on time, the best way to keep the user safe in a car in the event that you sense that an accident is about to happen. This is all of these examples come under autonomy. Within the Internet of Things as well, we expect smart things to be pervasive and ubiquitous, so always available, everywhere, and anywhere, and at any time we want them to be. This I already listed in module 1, but I'm listing again here. So pervasiveness, ubiquity, available everywhere, okay, part of the landscape, all right. They are heavily, in some cases, resource constrained. They've got low power, low processing power, low storage. And of course, we expect things in the Internet of Things to be relatively smart. Now, remember, there is a whole spectrum of devices in the Internet of Things, starting from your motion sensors, okay, the sensors that are deployed in the wild on farms, for example, to just to sense the humidity on the farmland, all the way to ships, I beg your pardon, ships, fighter jets, you know, embedded systems embedded in people. So we're talking about things like pacemakers and, you know, chips, ID chips in people, you know, so there's a spread spectrum of things, but we expect them to be relatively smart, to be able to sense, to be able to actuate. Some of them can make decisions. Some of these things will be able to operate independently, so they will have some degree of autonomy, semi-autonomy, or even full autonomy. So these are some features that you also need to bear in mind as somebody who is looking at security in the Internet of Things. You need to start to ask yourselves, how can these be exploited? Are these necessary? Should they be turned off for certain devices? Where are the areas, where are the challenging areas when we talk about Internet of Things security? Do we need all of these characteristics, all of these features for all of our smart things? You know, for example, if we take resource constrained systems, for example, well, do we need to implement encryption on resource constrained systems? I beg your pardon. Do they have to have that? Can they have something simpler? Do we need encryption on a motion sensor, or should we just say, you know what, We will limit the communication of the motion sensor to all devices on the smart home network. Is that the best way? Is that good enough as a security measure? Or do we say, you know what, we want to be able to access the motion sensor from our offices, even though the motion sensor is in our homes? Well, do you need some kind of VPN communication? Is that overkill? Or is that adequate because you have an elderly relative at home? So all of these things need to be considered. Should we say, well, you know what, the motion sensor should speak only to the hub or to the gateway, and I'll pick up the information from there. I don't need to know exactly what the motion sensor is saying. I don't need that information directly from. I need to know what it's saying, but I don't need to be able to access it directly from the motion sensor. Okay. Start to think like that as a cybersecurity professional or enthusiast. Okay. Cool. Now we are going to look at the current IoT security measures that are out there. It's quite a short list. It's not comprehensive because the IoT is rapidly developing. However, I would not put on this list the security measures that exist in traditional networks. For example, I will not put on this list security measures that exist across the internet or across our LANs and MANs and WANs and so on. This list contains those that I have seen being applied on the IoT already. So with respect specifically to what some people will call the IoT devices. Now, again, I said there's a spread spectrum, but some people believe that the IoT contains not your personal piece, your personal computer, a laptop, your smartphone. It contains things like drones, motion sensors, yes, pacemakers. That's the IoT. So if we go with that school of thought, then we can see that in terms of the IoT, these are some of the security measures that are being applied. We have usernames and passwords. Yes, a good starting point. But anybody who works in security or who is a security enthusiast knows that it's not the most reliable system, I suppose, for different reasons, of course, which we'll look at in the next few slides. But it's a good place to start, right? It's a good basis on which to kick off security, especially where it's applicable. Again, go back to spread spectrum of devices. Motion sensors, tiny sensors around the home for sensing when a door has been opened and closed. Do you need a username and password for that? Perhaps on your smart TV you do. Okay, smart car you do, to be able to access the interface in the smart car. But in a motion sensor or a door sensor, do you? Smart kettle, perhaps not. Okay, so things to think about in terms of balancing security. Remember one of the first few slides we looked at the difficulties, the trade-offs between security, usability, functionality. Okay. And then patches, of course, a very important one to have in the Internet of Things, with devices being spun up all over the place with different bespoke operating systems, protocols. Patches are needed now more than ever. Okay, so in the next few slides, we are going to explore these three key IoT security measures in detail, and then look at whether they are being used successfully, if they are failing, and perhaps ask ourselves questions about how we can improve our use of these three security measures, which are not bad in and of themselves. It's just how they are applied. Are they applied well? And what kinds of systems are we applying? How strong is the encryption? Is it appropriate, for example? How often do we patch? Is it being done automatically? Is it commercial? Is it free? And so on and so forth. So one of the current IoT security measures or existing IoT security measures is usernames and passwords. As I said in the previous slide, this is useful as a basic first step, okay? It's a good way to provide basic security, perhaps a first gateway, introductory system to security in the Internet of Things. It's not the most secure, especially since we know about the challenges with passwords, okay? I mean, some people use passwords that are easy to guess, but they don't do this deliberately. They do this because it is difficult to remember complex passwords. Of course, the advice is, well, try a password manager. Some people even advise writing the password down, but not sharing the paper on which you write it down or the phone. Most important thing is this. Research has shown, okay, consistently people continue to use easy to guess passwords in a lot of cases, but it's not anybody's fault, okay? So it's really up to the security professionals to encourage end users who are not so knowledgeable in cybersecurity and the threats that come with using insecure passwords on what these threats are, okay, what challenges they might face, and how they might be exploited and attacked, and how their systems might be attacked because of weak passwords and usernames. So it's useful, okay. Well, it's good because it can be used in combination with other authentication factors. All right. Again, it's vulnerable to the same historical exploits. It's vulnerable to guessing if it's easy. Shoulder surfing can be used and it can be copied easily that way. Social engineering, cracking, and so on and so forth. And on this slide, I have actually included an example of an attack which involves IoT nodes with weak usernames and passwords, and it is the well-known Mirai botnet attack. Okay. The targeted system in this case was Krebs on Security, the Krebs on Security website, the famous website, Dyn DNS, OVH hosting, and a few other websites were obviously affected as a result because many of them were hosted or being supported by one or two of these companies. The system is still continually scanning for new targets, especially since after the attack, the source code was released into the wild, and so it's been modified, been reused continually, and is scanning for new targets that use a list of default usernames and passwords. And I put the exclamation mark there because I would like to click on this link when you have a few spare minutes to have a look at the list of 60 plus usernames and passwords combinations that Mirai was able to exploit to target IoT end nodes and other nodes, of course, but in this case, it involved vulnerable Internet of Things nodes like IP cameras and DVR systems. You want to have a look at that list if you haven't. Quite easy to guess usernames and passwords, basic, very simple 4-letter, in some cases, usernames and passwords. Not advisable, okay? Passwords should be longer than four letters, if you don't mind. So that should be a basic thing that security professionals should know and should be able to advise colleagues, friends, companies on. So if you go out to consult for a company, your advice should be do not pick any username or password that looks like any of the ones on this list. Okay, it's a basic thing that anybody in cybersecurity knows. And of course, there's some more information about the Mirai botnets here, but that's not what we're looking at. What I want you to see is the case for using usernames and passwords in the IoT is real, it's basic, it's easy to implement, but then there are challenges as well, okay? And then we're going to look at encryption, which is one that a lot of people think, yes, it's something that should be used in Internet of Things. Let's encrypt everything and keep everything secure and safe. Well, it's a good idea to encrypt things, except that we are talking about resource constrained, resource limited systems. So encryption, the use of encryption is limited because of limited resources on the systems and nodes in Internet of Things. Use where applicable. That's it, basically. Use where applicable. But we also have a disparity of vendor solutions and protocols. So the applicability of certain encryptions, for example, on certain solutions, IoT solutions, might pose a challenge because you might have vendors that produce their own protocols, okay, and their own solutions. So if you have vendor A and vendor B with two disparate protocols that cannot communicate, and then you employ encryption somewhere in the middle, okay, or perhaps on one node and on the other node, in between, okay, in the communication systems, you've left gaps open. So what's the point of encrypting what's on this end and on this end when the information is transferred in plain text and can easily be copied? So basically some joined up thinking needs to be applied. Complexity for some companies and some individuals, like for instance, let's take for example, I beg your pardon, those that are designing the Internet of Things and solutions. They are not all large conglomerates and well-resourced companies. Some are just individuals or friends getting together in meetups, in meetings, coming together and coming up with solutions. Not everybody who has an idea for a smart thing has a clear understanding of encryption and how it can be applied. As well, there's a challenge of a trade-off, of trade-offs. Remember this, one of the first slides we looked at, where I talked about companies having to make decisions about what is important when it comes to getting things to market or including features on their products, features that sing and dance and that entice customers, okay? Thinking about company rivalries and so on, okay? Trade-offs have to be made, and there's a very interesting article I want you to have a look at here on trade-offs that are being made even
in the face of cybersecurity threats in the Internet of Things. Okay, so in some cases, companies might decide, let's have some encryption, but let's have weak encryption, as weak as possible. Let's not tighten things too much so that we don't lose functionality or speed, and so on and so forth. Again, problem of insufficient cyber physical security skills. It keeps rearing its head. But we're getting there. We're getting there. More and more people are becoming more well versed in cyber physical security or cyber security. Um, but it takes more than just reading a few articles to understand encryption, the basics of encryption, how to apply it. So even if you don't understand the mathematics and the algorithms, understanding how to apply it correctly. Okay. So, but this is a challenge for a lot of people, a lot of companies. And then how applicable are the existing encryption solutions within resource limited uh, end systems? This is something that also has to be considered. So jumping on a solution and saying encryption, yes, let's do it, might not be the best way to deal with security in the Internet of Things. Everything has to be considered when it comes to IoT end nodes, IoT networks. Again, example of node A and node B and the protocols that apply in between them, the disparate protocols. Decisions have to be made. What type of encryption? Will encryption be the best solution, or will it just weigh down our systems, cause our networks to become slower, solutions to become slower to get to the customers, and not provide any real benefit? In fact, open up holes and open us up to exploitation. Because if encryption is not applied or implemented properly, it can lead to other issues. That's why I suggest you really have a look at what's going on here on this page. It's quite interesting talk about encryption and how it can be bypassed, and basically when it's not, even though it's been implemented, and other ways as well in which just having encryption there doesn't really provide real security. And then the last example is an example of patches. So patches are useful for preventing attacks. For example, attacks that are enabled by zero-day exploits, preventing them from infecting systems and from spreading. There's also a challenge with patches. So, well, patches can be applied automatically or manually. Now, requiring end users to manually go around their homes, updating their thermostats, their Fitbits, their fridges, their cars, it might be a bit of a challenge. Perhaps companies, IoT service providers, solution providers might want to consider having automated patches available, but then they also know the challenges that come with having patches installed. You might install a patch today that causes a system to fall down, so to speak, in double quotes, okay? Causes the system to stop working, or systems that were communicating normally against system A and system B to suddenly stop communicating. This is something that needs to be explored in detail, for companies, for end users, for even you listening and watching this video now. Things that you have to consider: your end devices, your wearables. Do you update them manually, or do you give it a day and see what happens? Look, keep reading online, finding out what's going on, see if people's systems are falling down before you make a decision about whether to patch or not. So these are decisions that have to be made. Security cannot just be shut out there, and say, yes, let's patch everything. And then should it be automated or manual? We don't know. Okay, it is something that also needs to be considered. Automated is always deemed best. It's always there, expressed or promoted, I beg your pardon, as the best way to deal with patching. But is it actually the best way? Do we have too many devices to handle? Will manual patching not be feasible within office networks or hospital networks or home networks? And then some patches are free and some are commercial. Good example is what happened with the WannaCry system. Okay, the patches were made available. We're grateful to Microsoft. They made the patches available after as the attack went on, and they were able to help a lot of people who were still using old operating systems, unpatched operating systems. But in some cases, you have to purchase your patches. How feasible will this be? For example, if an end user has, again, 20 smart devices, if 10 vendors decide you have to pay for patches and the other 10 go for free, um, the free option. Well, what decisions will end users make? Will they then decide to abandon the products of the companies that provide commercial patches, or will they stick with them? Will there be a boycott? Will there be, some kind of wrangling, or I don't want to use the word fight, but a, a push and pull to try to get all patches to be made free? Will companies be losing out as a result and therefore provide even less secure services or irregular patches in order to save money? So there are a lot of things to consider in this scenario. And there's a good example of an example IoT attack where patching was required, was what was required to stop the attack. So watch the video on the page. It illustrates the devil's IV, and how patching is important in Internet of Things scenarios, Internet of Things devices, Internet of Things networks. On this slide, I have listed some IoT threat points that I would like us to explore one after the other, beginning with the design of a smart thing or a smart network. IoT vendors, IoT hobbyists, IoT designers out there need to consider and take security into consideration from the beginning, during the design phases. Security should not be something that they choose to bolt on after something has gone wrong, or after a threat has been identified or an exploit has been discovered in their system. So just as with software development or with any other IT, any other phase, any other field of IT, security has to be considered from the beginning, introduced to the planning phase. How does security fit in? What kind of security will be best on this system? What kind of security will be irrelevant or redundant or be too heavy to allow any kind of functionality? All of these decisions about trade-offs need to be made during the design phase. Bolting it on later on after an exploit has already been spread across the internet, shared, and is already being used on your end users is not the best way to deal with security. It's an easy way to lose your reputation, lose customers, lose followership, lose support, and even lose investment in your product. So security must be introduced during the design phase because it is the most important phase in the Internet of Things and in every other field of IT, of information technology. The implementation of security as well is an area that can be exploited by malicious parties. I've put encryption as an example. I already talked about encryption and how if it is not implemented correctly, it can actually allow or introduce holes into a system. Actually, implementing security poorly or incorrectly gives a false sense of security, a sense of security that doesn't exist, okay? Relying on a password and username and password combination system that allows users to create user passwords that are 6 letters long. I mean, that's just creating a false sense of security. It's not real, okay? And cannot be trusted, cannot be relied on. The same thing again applies to encryption and every other security system that's in place. So the implementation is also a very, very crucial part of security and can actually be a threat point in the Internet of Things. The different protocols. What kind of protocol have you decided to employ? In the Internet of Things, protocols are being spun up all the time, new protocols. There is not yet a standard set of protocols for the Internet of Things, even though we are gradually converging towards certain points, but we still have quite a few out there that are being used. So what kind of protocol have you decided to employ? How secure is this protocol? Are you writing your own protocol from scratch? Are you picking from the hundreds that are out there? The protocol that exists already that you have decided to use, for example, is it secure? What are the flaws? What are the challenges? Can you provide some kind of security for it? Are you going to bolt on some security? Are you going to weigh the pros and cons and perhaps opt for something else or opt to write your own? These decisions have to be made during the design phase again. Now, what ports are available on your devices? Do you have ports on your design that don't even need to exist? These need to be considered as well. Interfaces again that are available on your system. Have you designed your system just like with ports, protocols? Have you designed them with unnecessary protocols? Okay, unnecessary interfaces. Why do you need, for example, an Ethernet interface if you're not going to connect using wired network. What exactly is the point of having an Ethernet interface? Consider all of these. Um, do you need to have Bluetooth enabled in your system if it's never going to communicate over Bluetooth? All right. Universal plug and play is something else that also needs to be considered. UPnP opens up ports through firewalls. Okay, so if you have IoT systems and you want them to communicate directly with service providers and the cloud, in some cases, because of how vendors want IoT devices to be used, they want them to be as easy to use as possible. They allow for direct communication through through firewalls. Okay, so they allow for these systems for the universal plug and play system, which is inbuilt into their IoT devices, to simply make its way through a firewall. So if you've told yourself that, well, I have a firewall around my company, and we're fine, we're protected, but then your staff come in with UPnP enabled devices in the name of having Internet of Things devices with them all the time, well, your firewall kind of is not exactly a security measure. So this is a threat point that you need to explore if you own a business, or you work with colleagues in your office, or you're designing smart things, or even in your home. You need to start to face the realities that sometimes having a perimeter around is not a sign that you are living in a secure environment, a cyber physically secure environment. Also, remember what I talked about earlier about the access points, okay? Hotspots that are around that users can pick up IP addresses and connect to the internet through. These are things you also need to be aware of. The configuration of smart devices is also crucial. If vendors supply devices and say, well, you have to have a username and a password, and the user decides to go for an easy username and password, even though the vendor allows for up to 12 characters, for example, in a password, and complicated, but the vendor does not mandate it and does not say you cannot set a password unless it is highly complex. Users might choose to go for something easy, or if a vendor does not mandate the use of a username and password in order to access a system, a user might choose not to have a username and password. So ease of use trumping the need for a higher level of security. So configuration also matters. Power failure. Okay, if you want to have a perfect denial of service, all you need to do is pull a plug. And unfortunately, we are moving into the Internet of Things. So physical attacks, injurious attacks, those that can directly affect humans, okay, physically, are some of the attacks that sadly we are going to see more and more of. So power failure is one threat point that needs to be explored. Do you have backup power? Um, in a hospital network, for example, this is crucial. Are you relying on everything being online all the time? What kind of backups do you have? Again, our minds are cast back to WannaCry and what happened with the NHS and the staff having to revert to dealing with paper and pen instead of computers. Well, if you are going to deploy smart things on your home network and your lights are suddenly being controlled by a malicious party from outside your home, how ready are you for such a scenario? What kind of backups do you have in place? Theft is another way to ensure a complete denial of service. IoT devices can be stolen or even replaced with malicious ones, ones that have malicious code on them. Mobile applications and apps which are used for access and control are also vulnerable. Okay, replacing a legitimate app with a malicious app is one way to cause damage within an IoT network or an IoT device. Cloud services are also a threat point. Um, the end user doesn't have access to the data on the cloud, doesn't know who is processing it, doesn't know how much of it is stored, for how long, who can collect that data, retrieve it, replace it. So SLAs is where SLAs come into play, and your ability to investigate your cloud service provider and make sure that the agreements that they have with you are cover your privacy needs. Okay, cover your data retention needs. Basically cover everything that is included in the DPA and in GDPR, because we're moving towards GDPR in 2018. So you have to make sure that your cloud service providers meet basic requirements. Okay, they don't collect data from you that doesn't need to be collected. All right, so you purchase that smart fridge, you have to start to ask questions about where is the information going, why does the information have to go to the cloud. Again, it's a trade-off. Some people say, well,
you shouldn't say don't connect everything to the to the internet, because without connecting to the internet, data cannot be retrieved from, for example, your smart fridge, and the service provider cannot perhaps make suggestions to you on when best to buy certain products. Okay, and and perhaps help you save money. So a service provider might say, well, purchase these tomatoes today because they expire in 10 days time, and we see that you have X amount of oil in the house and fish, and by the time you buy the tomatoes now and your fish and your oil, and you'll be able to prepare this meal and store the meal in the freezer, which is ready for freezing food, and make several suggestions that will help you optimize your spending. Okay, minimize your spending, optimize the use of the resources that you already have in your fridge, optimize the use of your electricity, for example, energy in your home. Well, that's a trade-off. Somebody else will say, well, I can make those decisions myself. I'm not going to connect my fridge to the internet. Okay, so these are things you need to consider. I connect to the internet. What kind of information is being collected by the service provider? The fridge vendor, for example. How is this helping me? Can I do this myself? Can I reduce the amount of data that's being collected? Okay, do I have access to the information? Will it be deleted when I request that it be deleted? That's something that's coming in with GDPR, the rights of people in European Union citizens and everybody who is under GDPR, to request that data information held about them should be deleted, and for that information to be deleted as soon as they request it or soon after. So these are things you also need to consider before you sign up with different service providers. These are IoT threat points that we need to be aware of. IoT systems also call home, okay, just as part of their functionality, as part of their everyday operation. Also, you need to ask yourself, okay, how is this call home set up? Does it, for example, like UPnP, does it bore a hole through my firewall? Am I happy with that? What are the threats that are introduced as a result? What are the issues that this raises for me? Am I happy to deal with these issues? Can I mitigate against the threats? Can I manage these issues by myself? Should I look for alternatives? Does this device have to call home? So these are threat points that can be explored by hackers out there. And as security professionals, these are things that we should be aware of, and we should have solutions to these questions, suggestions for end users, because more and more as we go forward, we will be approached by end users, members of the public, who will say, well, excuse me, you are working in cybersecurity, or I saw you doing that Internet of Things cybersecurity course. Well, can you give me some suggestions on how to keep my devices safe or my data safe? Okay, so going forward, these are things we need to think about, bear in mind, and start to come up with answers to. Now, remember that within the Internet of Things, IoT end nodes are supposed to be available at any time, anywhere. So this feature of being always on makes Internet of Things devices continually available as targets. Okay, the fact that they are constantly on, constantly, for instance, working on your network, connected on your network, means that whenever an attacker needs to attack such a device, the device is always available for them to attack. I'm going to look at this basic example of login attempts now. I know it's quite basic. You might say, well, everybody should know this already, but I'm still going to talk about it. Is there any cap on the number of login attempts that is available on your smart home devices? For example, if let's say you're a vendor, have you designed into your software system a cap on login attempts? If I'm trying to attack a smart fridge in a smart home, for example, using a guess the password attack, can I try 10 attempts in the space of 1 minute, or will I be stopped and locked out after 3 attempts or 5 attempts? What kinds of caps are there? It sounds like a basic thing, but this is something that some vendors will not consider, all because they're trying to get functionality out there, trying to get solutions out there. Okay, so these, some from the most basic to the most complex security settings, security solutions, they all have to be considered. Now, of course, again, one main issue with security in the Internet of Things is a lack of security skills among IoT designers, IoT vendors, IoT enthusiasts. However, that's not an excuse. They can outsource these requirements. So this has to be considered. If you don't have the skills, you don't have the knowledge, feel free to ask questions, feel free to outsource your requirements. There are companies out there, more and more people are going into cybersecurity, getting trained, getting skilled. Okay, some people are retraining from different fields, going into cybersecurity. Go out there, ask questions, get some support with your security requirements so that you produce much more secure devices and secure solutions. Okay. Now, within the Internet of Things, we're looking at billions of devices being connected to the internet. Okay, by there are different statistics out there. Okay, statistics that say we're going to have 50 billion devices by 2020. Just so many examples. Um, because of the volume of devices we have out there and volumes of similar devices coming from similar vendors, the challenge is that we might end up with similar devices that have the same vulnerabilities. If you walk into a hospital that has 1,000, for example, motion sensors or 2,000 motion sensors deployed around the hospital area network, you might have a situation where a vulnerability on one of the motion sensors is found on all the other motion sensors. So if an attacker is able to successfully exploit that vulnerability on one, then there is a potential that that vulnerability can be spread across the network. Okay, this has to be considered, this volumetric propagation and effect of attacks within the IoT. The IoT is making that more and more possible, and again, the attacks are more likely to be injurious towards people. Okay, what you probably would hear in those days about attacks will be, oh, this company got hacked and they lost $10 million, for example. Well, what you might hear with as the Internet of Things develops and more attacks happen around and in relation to the Internet of Things will be things like, I mean, sadly, but you might hear things like this company got hacked and 10 million pounds was stolen from them. However, the company was controlling the systems of 10 different hospitals across the country. And as a result, the systems in the hospitals were shut down and 10 people lost their lives. Okay, so hacking in the Internet of Things is more likely to have a direct effect on human life. Okay, something we really need to think about. Again, back with the encryption discussion, weak or lack of encryption at all in systems might also pose a challenge and a threat to Internet of Things systems. Insecure physical and insecure logical web interfaces is something that also we also need to consider. Insecure software and firmware. Okay, again, going back to the design, how secure is your software? Did you go through any secure software development life cycle during the development of your system? Were you able to pick up any bugs? Were you able to fix the bugs before you deployed your software? And the firmware as well. Was the firmware deployed with malware from the factory, for example? These stories are not unheard of. What did you do to fix that? Okay, what are you doing to ensure that malware cannot be introduced to your systems during deployments, right? And then a complete lack of or insufficient authentication and authorization implementation is also another challenge with Internet of Things security. You should have at least some basic authentication and authorization implementation on your system, and basic is not good enough. Okay, depending on the system we're talking about, again, look at this spectrum of devices. You're looking at motion sensors all the way to smart cars. Okay, apply the authentication and authorization system that is fitting for the scenario, that is fitting for the device that we are talking about. This slide I borrowed from module 1. It's just a repeat of practically the same slide with some more points added, just talking about vulnerabilities and threats again that exist within the Internet of Things. So you can have a look at this in your spare time, but if you've already gone through it in module 1, then that's perhaps fine, but feel free to revise your vulnerabilities and threats in the Internet of Things by going through this slide. So this slide is titled Why? Okay, why do we have all these challenges, these threats, these issues in the Internet of Things? Why are we looking at Internet of Things security? Well, one of the reasons why we are facing challenges within the IoT, challenges within security in the Internet of Things, is because it is easier to launch attacks. Okay, because we now have things like cybercrime as a service. We have DDoS systems for hire. Okay, the fact that these systems can be automated and purchased with a, a few dollars, this makes it a bigger challenge. And remember what I said about the volume of the attacks. Okay, you have systems that share vulnerabilities, similar systems from the same vendors deployed on vast networks, okay, across vast areas with similar vulnerabilities that can be exploited by systems that are automated and that cost a few dollars here and there. Okay, cost the attackers only a few dollars here and there. This is one of the major reasons why Internet of Things security is such an important topic to explore now, okay, before things will go too far, before things get out of hand. It's best to start to secure systems now. It's best to start to implement different kinds of security solutions. Make sure that the security configurations on smart devices are correct. The appropriate kinds of security measures are taken and used and applied on different Internet of Things devices, networks, and so on and so forth. So yes, it is easier to launch attacks nowadays. It's becoming even easier. And as a result, Internet of Things security is a very important field to get involved in right now, especially as somebody who can make recommendations for security solutions within the Internet of Things. Um, we also now have easier, less secure, plentiful targets. Again, going back to the question of volume. You have thousands of sensors with similar vulnerabilities deployed across networks, more targets to hire or to co-opt into botnets. Okay, more targets, more victims for attackers to co-opt, to hire for nothing, or could hire, use their resources to carry out DDoS attacks. Again, we go back to the traditional reasons for hacking. One of them is political or ideological motivations, okay? Hacktivism, as it is known. So hackers that have a cause or hackers that have causes. Well, they haven't gone away, okay? We all have things that we are passionate about, and some people decide to use their skills, cybersecurity skills, to make their feelings known by defacing websites, defacing government websites, defacing company websites, school websites, and so on and so forth, okay? This hasn't gone anywhere. And with the Internet of Things, course, still going to continue to be an issue. Again, individual and group pride, just as before, okay, is still a motivation for attackers, for cyber criminals, or for just cybersecurity enthusiasts who have the skills. They decide, you know what, I want to show off to my friends, show them that I can do this, okay, I'm able to do this. Show off perhaps to a rival group, for example. That will probably take us to the next point about ransom and extortion from end users, from C-suite staff, rivalry between companies, or even between hacker groups. Okay, this can stem from pride. Okay, saying that, listen, I'm able to do this, and it can also go into a deeper sphere, a deeper angle. Okay, where people now start to carry out attacks in order to beat their rivals, for example, at certain things. So you say, you know what, I'm the one who can hack this government website, showed you that I can do it. Unfortunately, they then start to demand ransoms, from the government, so rivalries can take on a deeper and a darker angle, so to speak, or a deeper and a darker dimension. Rival groups attacking each other is also something else that we need to consider. And then hackers, of course, some of them hack for money. That's the reason why people hack. So someone might decide to hack a neighbor, for example, hack their lights and mess with their lights until they maybe get rid of their dog. That's also a motivation, or pay them a ransom. It can be a next door neighbor carrying out the attack. Hackers are not people in hoodies in upstairs bedrooms. That image of an attacker is inaccurate. Hackers, just like with things in the Internet of Things, spread across a wide spectrum of people. You will be surprised the kinds of people, or the people that are involved in hacking, not just black hat hackers or cyber criminals, people who are involved in cybersecurity, full stop, okay? Well, another thing is the targets of cyber attacks might not necessarily be the main proponents of the issues at hand. Okay, so for example, if you have a government that is proposing a certain idea, for example, let's look at immigration. You can have a government saying, you know what, all immigrants from certain countries should be banned for a certain period. Well, a cyber attacker might decide, well, instead of attacking the government, they will attack, or instead of attacking, for example, the president's office or the prime minister's office, we might decide, you know what, let's attack people associated with that office. Okay, maybe the part of the wing of the or the arm of the government that deals with immigration, for example, or the passport office specifically, the people that actually do the passport processing. So sometimes the targets that are eventually attacked successfully may not even be the people who are proposing certain ideas. You know, publicly, the people that are seen publicly as the ones who are pushing certain ideas. And then, of course, we have script kiddies, so people just trying their hands on different freely available hacking tools, cyber criminal tools, cyber security tools, I beg your pardon, out there on the internet. So people trying different attack skills and methods that they've learned from PDFs and files, different kinds of files that they've got from the internet. And then we also have the issue of errors, so people making honest mistakes. Okay, this can also lead to serious issues within the IoT network. It already leads to issues in the physical world, okay, with people forgetting laptops on trains and walking around with government papers and exposing information to the world instead of putting these important sensitive documents in envelopes. For instance, they walk around and expose certain details to the press. People hanging around with very powerful cameras. Well, the same thing happens in the IT world, in the cyber world. Okay, mistakes can happen, data can be lost, security configurations can be done poorly, okay, and that can lead to errors. And of course, there are many more reasons why people carry out cyber attacks, cyber physical attacks as well. On this slide, I provide a list of recent IoT related attacks. The first one involves the use of drones to disrupt industrial systems and to carry out surveillance on hard to reach facilities. So you can visit the site to find out more about the attack, how it is carried out, who carried it out. And some of these attacks actually were just demos. For instance, demos planned by people who went to different conferences like the DEF CON conference, the Black Hat conference, and so on. So some of them are not attacks carried out against actual targets, but just demonstrations of what is actually possible with IoT devices. We also have something called Snoopy drones, and I'll just read out the description from the website. So the Snoopy drone just involves setting up a fake Wi-Fi access point. Remember I talked earlier about the hotspot access points and so on, okay? So from the website link, we have this information. The drone can also access location data, usernames, passwords, and credit card numbers. So they can access these pieces of information from any device that connects to this Snoopy drone. All right. Amazon, PayPal, and Yahoo accounts were among those that were hacked by the drone when the researchers demoed the Snoopy drone in London. And over the course of just an hour, the Snoopy drone collected network names and locations of 150 different devices, all of which could be hacked using the drone. Okay, so beware those access points out there. But this was done by the security professionals to demonstrate, security professionals from SensePost to demonstrate what is possible with drones in terms of IoT security, IoT vulnerability, and IoT hacking. Brickabot malware. Okay, this involves using a malware which is actually similar to Mirai to leverage the availability of default usernames and passwords. Okay, remember we talked earlier about IoT devices shipping with easy to guess passwords, default usernames and passwords, and users not changing these. So Brickabot leverages this and carries out a permanent denial of service attack on the affected IoT nodes. So with Mirai co-opted the devices that were found and used them to carry out DDoS attacks. Well, with Brickabot malware, the devices were basically killed. So you can kill a device in different ways. You can just shut it down, for instance. You can format a device, anything, turn it off, take it off a network, whatever. So yes, that's what the Brickabot malware did. Visit the link again. Under that link, you will find out more information. DDoS attacks, we talked about the attack on Krebs on security,
I beg your pardon, that should be dying DNS and OVH. Okay, so this involved the use of over 100,000 compromised. In fact, I've seen in some websites that there were over 500,000. But anyway, we're going with over 100,000 compromised IoT devices. Again, this included IP cameras and DVRs. Now, if you want to know more about how the Mirai botnet attack happened step by step, and you want to get more information and more details, you can visit the link on malwaremustdie.org. It will give you some details, more details, in fact, on how Mirai works, and excellent information that you can use to inform yourself about Mirai and exactly what happened. Carrying on the theme of our real life IoT attacks or IoT related attacks, we look at another site which says that it is possible for code resident in some components of an automobile to control critical systems. Okay, but the most important thing is the second statement. The researchers have shown that such malicious code might be injected by an attacker with physical access to the vehicle or even over Bluetooth or the telematics unit. So what they were able to demonstrate is that there is code in resident in some components of, for example, a car that can be injected by a physical attacker and used, okay, to override certain systems in a car, okay? For instance, it can be used to affect the operation, for example, of the locks in the car or even the brakes in the car, which is quite dangerous when you think about the kind of damage that can be done if an attacker has just enough proximity or a Bluetooth connection to a car to influence the operation of a car, especially if the car is in motion, carrying, a person, a family, for example, or somebody is trying to get to a hospital. For instance, think about an ambulance, okay? And if this can be done in a car, then it's not going to be a great leap for it to be achieved in other kinds of vehicles, okay? I've also included here other car hacking related links that I think you will find quite interesting. Link 1 takes you again to more demos of attackers, of cybersecurity professionals who have carried out even further demos to demonstrate the insecurity of certain systems in smart cars that can be exploited. So using real life demonstrations, again, in conferences to companies. So these are not actual attacks carried out on members of the public, but just to demonstrate issues that exist. And on LinkedIn, you will find different PDF files that I think you will find quite interesting to read and to peruse and to gain more information on the real life cyber attacks that are taking place on smart vehicles out there today. As cybersecurity professionals, I am pretty sure you have heard the word worm before, okay? Self-propagating malware, a malicious piece of software that self-propagates across networks. Well, now we have something called a light bulb worm. Welcome to the Internet of Things and security issues in the IoT. So as a quick example, a light bulb worm involves using Zigbee wireless connectivity and the physical proximity of IoT devices, okay, like a lamp or a bulb, to spread a worm from one IoT device to another. So you have devices that are connected using Zigbee, built-in Zigbee, and then devices that are close together. You can actually carry out a spiral attack where a worm goes from one device to another, and before you know what's going on, you've spread a worm across an entire street light setting or street light setup. Okay, so this link will take you to a demonstration and an explanation of what the cybersecurity professionals have done to show us how this is possible and how this works. A detailed description of the same attack against the Philips Hue, which uses ZLL, so Zigbee Light Link protocol, is also available at the link there. So a lot of attacks, a lot of demonstrations of attacks that are possible are being done out there, okay, especially in cybersecurity conferences and events, and these are things that we need to be aware of. If you're going to use any of these protocols, you need to be aware of the vulnerabilities. And by the way, the links that I am providing, the majority of them are fresh, new links from recent events. So things like links from 2016, 2017. I don't bring links from 2005, 2008, 2010. So
as a security professional, okay, watching this video, listening to this presentation, you need to be aware that these are things that are possible today. So we need to get our act together and start coming out with recommendations, doing our research, testing different solutions, and coming up with recommendations. Cybersecurity professionals are needed now, okay? If you are in this field, you're in the best place to be. Come out with your recommendations, make suggestions to companies, document this, make suggestions to your government wherever you are in the world, and provide solutions to the threats that we face. Okay, and if you find any vulnerabilities or systems that you can exploit, holes that you can exploit, feel free to do a demo and to talk to the companies involved to explain to them, listen, your systems are vulnerable, perhaps you should fix it. Hopefully they will pay attention. And sometimes a lot of security professionals go quietly to companies and make recommendations to them, so you might want to also consider doing that, so we can limit the damage that can be done by less scrupulous people, by cyber criminals, for instance. Continuing with these real life Internet of Things cyber physical threats, we're looking now at sonic gun threats. So there is a link under the word attack which I want you to visit, and there are several videos which I would like you to watch in your spare time. This attack involves using a vibrating source which matches the resonant frequency of a gyroscope inside an IoT device in such a way that that vibrating source interferes with the sensor stability and causes the sensor to send bad data to the device it is embedded in. So you put a vibrating source at a distance from an IoT device, and the gyroscope inside that device, okay, picks up that information, perhaps through resonance. Resonance, two things vibrating at the same frequency. And then it affects or influences the IoT device that contains it negatively. For example, the IoT device can then lose its balance. Why am I saying lose its balance? If you look at the last line on this page, you have things like self-balancing robot toys that fall over because of this kind of effect. So this is demonstrated on that link. I want you to just visit it, have a look and see what is possible through something as simple as understanding the concept of what is contained in IoT devices. There's a gyroscope, there's resonance, there is sound, and other kinds of features, other kinds of stimuli that are received by this device. And once you can exploit that stimuli, what is it expecting? At what frequency? Well, how about if we tune a malicious device, a third device, to this stimuli and see if we can use resonance to shake things up and see what happens. So a team of researchers from Alibaba Security demonstrated how sound and ultrasound could be used to attack devices that depend on sensor inputs from gyroscopes, accelerometers, and other microelectromechanical systems. This attack was demonstrated against, note this, commercial virtual reality headsets, a DigiDrone, a DJI drone, a Xiaomi hoverboard, and a self-balancing robot toy. So again, go to those videos and watch the effects of having sonic gun threats, and try to picture how this perhaps can affect people in real life. So these videos are done in safe environments just to demonstrate the threats that are out there. But can you imagine what will happen, or what can happen if these are carried out against end users who have no idea of what is contained in their IoT devices? Okay, they've been sold unsafe, insecure IoT devices, or devices that have not been configured securely with security in mind, or even designed with security in mind. Okay, and we need to now start to think of countermeasures to this. And I know you guys can, students listening, watching this video, I know you can think of suggestions on how to counter some of these attacks. On this slide, I have just provided two more links to other IoT hacking examples. I do not think any website, any presentation, any class can provide a comprehensive list. The list is growing every day, but I think you will find these two very interesting because they have tried to put together a long list of IoT attacks out there. So have a look at these, explore them. Feel free to send questions in the forum, ask questions about what you don't understand, make suggestions, counter these attacks. Let us know if you have tried IoT attacks in your own spare time, or let's say IoT demos in safe environments in your own spare time, and what the what the outcome of these demos have been. Share your data, share your information. Let's learn from each other. But yeah, feel free to visit these links to have a look at what's being done out there, successful attacks, successful demos, and yes, think from the perspective of a cybersecurity professional and ask yourself how we can counter some of these attacks or even prevent them from being successful in the first place. On this slide, I present issues that or topics that I refer to as other issues. Now, somebody who is thinking about IoT security might be thinking in terms of hacking, breaking things. I, I just thought I should introduce these issues because they are somewhat related and important within the discussion of Internet of Things security. The first one is privacy, which we actually have already touched on, ensuring that the information and data that is being collected about end users by IoT devices is not being shared with unnecessary third parties or by third parties with their partners, for example, partner companies, in order to provide services that the end user probably requires, but the end user has not signed off on in terms of, yes, you can use my data to provide in order to provide me these services. So data is just one aspect of privacy within the Internet of Things. But privacy is something that is not going to go away in a hurry and needs to be taken seriously. If you are going to get involved in Internet of Things security, you're going to get involved in designing smart things and nodes that will be sold, smart apps, for example, that will interface with smart devices and provide services and information to end users. You need to take privacy very seriously and consider end users' privacy requirements. Legal issues will be touched on in the next few slides, so I will not dwell on this. Cyber insurance is an area that is gaining a lot of traction and is receiving a lot of interest. Cyber insurance is very important. Companies that get attacked, how can they demonstrate that they put in all the necessary, relevant, all the right security measures? Okay, how can they demonstrate this adequately? They put in adequate and even beyond adequate security measures such that they are not penalized for losses, and how can they also recover the losses that they suffer as a result of attacks, as long as they can demonstrate that they covered all their bases when it comes to security. But there is a lot more involved, so you might want to visit the websites of cyber insurance companies. There are more insurance companies going into cybersecurity, and some companies are just being set up mainly for cybersecurity insurance. So there are several websites out there that you can have a look at, but it's a big area, and it's something that more of us probably want to pay attention to. Cyber illiteracy is something else that we need to consider when we talk about the Internet of Things. So cyber illiteracy is not universal. Okay, it's growing, but it's not universal. Before we even start talking about cyber security literacy amongst members of the public, I don't know where you are listening to this video from, but I'm talking to people from across the world now. We don't know how much about computers people around us know, never mind security in computers. So this is quite possibly going to form a challenge within the Internet of Things. If end users see solutions out there, hardware solutions, software solutions that meet their requirements, okay, that will help them in their daily lives, they might opt to go for these devices and tools without asking questions about security. It therefore falls on the rest of us, okay, to take this up as a challenge and as a responsibility to support end users in their quest for solutions, IoT-based solutions. So these are some topics that, yes, I said some people might say, well, this has nothing to do with hacking, I'm not interested in all, but these are things you need to consider. And if you are somebody who is thinking of coming into the Internet of Things field or cybersecurity as a field, I mean, there are different ways in which you can come in. You don't have to be a hands-on hacker. You don't have to be a lecturer or a speaker like I am. You can decide, you know what, I'm going to go into the law aspect, the law side of things, and see if I can help people who get attacked and advise people on keeping themselves safe. For example, advise people on cyber insurance, or even just educate members of the public through pamphlets, writing articles, giving talks in schools, universities, and to companies. and educating people, and of course advising people. Even you can even do this on a one-on-one basis on their privacy and how best to manage their privacy in the developing Internet of Things landscape. Now I'm going to stretch us a bit into the future. Okay, again, we might hear some complaints and groans about how this doesn't tie into cybersecurity. Well, the topics on this page, they do actually tie in. Artificial intelligence. Okay, speaking of autonomous systems, this is a is directly linked to autonomous systems. Okay, having artificially intelligent systems that are developed enough to be able to developed enough to make decisions by themselves. Okay, is an offshoot, and it's something cyber security professionals need to start to pay attention to. Okay, they need to be aware of the extent of artificial intelligence capabilities, current capabilities, and future planned capabilities, and how this will affect the IoT systems that we have in place that we are developing, and just basic IT systems that we have in place. How does security fit into artificial intelligence? Will it still be cybersecurity? Will it only be physical security? Will it be psychological? Will it be social? Okay. In terms of going into the future and future of work and preparing yourself for the future, you cannot just dwell on what applies today. I'm a cybersecurity professional and that's good enough. No, you need to prepare yourself. So you look at what is coming down the road. Artificial intelligence is one that's already here, and you might want to explore the different opportunities and probably create even niche areas. Look at it and say, you know what, this is not being explored. I'm going to explore it and write about it and talk about it, and even perhaps create a business around it. And for instance, consultancy around it, how to support people. It's all about supporting people and finding solutions to prevent attacks from being successful. Machine learning, of course, is useful. It's being used more and more around cybersecurity. So we have automated security systems now that can collect data, process data, and produce results such that you don't have to have humans anymore scanning through network logs. You just have automated systems collecting these logs and pinpointing down to the exact end node and time of day when malware, for example, enters the network. So this is very useful for cybersecurity, and it's going to become even more useful as more and more data is generated by more and more connected things. Same thing applies with deep learning, data mining, and data analytics, again, all tied together. Robotics, roboethics, and law, similarly to artificial intelligence. Okay, these are coming down the line. Robotics, useful, very useful for supporting, for example, end users in their homes, like elderly people who want to choose to live at home for longer and who have no relatives living with them, and who have carers that come in once in a while. They might opt to take in robotic carers. You also have robotic carers in the services industry. So you can have robotic systems welcoming you to hotels, for example. So all of these, the security implications behind all of these have to be considered. You might think of them as soft topics and you see ethics and law and, well, why do I have to consider all of this? But you somewhere down the line, okay, if security is going to be automated completely using the first four topics on this page, then security professionals might have to consider where they fit in and how they can support end user security, okay, as technology evolves and develops ever rapidly. Protocol interoperability, people with skills to skills in connecting protocols and plugging gaps and plugging security gaps are going to be required as well. In fact, are required already. Digital forensics, very important in the Internet of Things. We have more and more data, more and more devices. What is the relevant evidence? When a crime has been committed, where should the evidence be collected from? Should it be collected from the end nodes? Should it be collected from the gateway? Should it be collected from the hubs or from the cloud? So all of these frameworks are being developed. You can look up research papers on digital forensics. I've written some myself, digital forensics in the Internet of Things. Very interesting, growing field, and it's one that you might want to consider. Pen testing, of course, which is the group that's hosting this website, I suppose, hosting this training is a pen test based group. So it's something also you might want to look into as part of the Internet of Things. And then again, autonomous systems that are self-guiding, self-deciding. What kind of security should apply? What kind of security already applies? And going forward, we've already talked about some of the security that applies. IoT, autonomous systems, they're all tied together going forward. How can these be improved?